Welcome back to the Fantasy Football Veteran Series by Fantasy Football Hub. So in the previous videos in this series, we met Andy Green and got to know a bit about his impressive fantasy football history. If you missed it, the links are in the description below. In this video, we're going to learn how Andy managed to finish third in FPL last season. So Andy, could you firstly briefly just kind of run us through that incredible season you had?
Well, it seems like such a long time ago now. I can't remember it week by week, what I did, and I guess I can go back and look through the game week history for a more precise answer. But I think let's be honest, there's this big debate around whether it's skill or luck or what percentage skill versus luck. I think there's an element of luck to finishing well. I mean, you could argue what rank is an element of luck to get there, but I think you have to have skill in the first place to put yourself in a position that you can then take a few gambles or take a few educated decisions that you might get lucky with, and then that can really get you the jump up. So I've prior to finishing third, before I finished in the top, I think I was 525th, and then I've had another top 10k and a top 11k. So I think the difference between those seasons and last season for me wasn't a great deal, other than some educated risks that I took, and I'll go into some other things. Like, for example, last season I believe I only took one hit all season, which is something I'm a big advocate of, but we'll go into that later. But just talking about the kind of educated risks that I will take throughout a season. So I'm not one of these players that will just just jump on a new player. For example, like Bruno Fernandes. I know that worked out and great. What I would be looking for is maybe a player coming back from injury, or a player that's been out of form that's maybe got a nice fixture turn. So, for example, I think last season it was the Salah versus Bournemouth that got me the nice jump up the rank when I captained him. He'd been injured and only come on for the last 20 minutes of the previous game, whereas I think it was the kind of competition in all the polls were heading towards Kane, who was playing Cardiff, who had just come off, I think, a goal and an assist. So everyone was on Kane. This is prior to Kane being the defensive midfielder, but everyone was I think it was like 70% of the polls were on Harry Kane. Yeah. And I saw Salah come back. He played the last 20 minutes. I think he got an assist in that time. And I saw that, looking at some of the stats, you mentioned that I look at a lot of stats, more progressively every season, that Bournemouth were incredibly leaky, both home and away. And so I thought, right, well, this is a chance to kind of, I was already quite highly ranked anyway, but this is a chance to really get a jump up. So I went for Salah over Kane, even though I had Kane. I think Kane was the vice. And then, of course, Kane proceeded to blank and Salah got a hat-trick. So that then, it was a huge jump up the ranks. And then, of course, as I mentioned before, that the last game of the season, when you get towards those tail end of the season, you've got to start to take a few more risks, depending on what your goal is. Do you want to maintain your rank or get that jump up? So I think that those educated risks at certain times of the season are key. Now, they don't always work, right? Like this season's a prime example. So I'll give you an example from this season when it didn't work. So everyone had jumped on Kevin De Bruyne. Started the season very cheap at 9.5. Then he got injured. Now, given that he had been fairly injury prone over the last few years, I thought so key. I thought Mahrez's stats are great. I think at that time he was like 8.5, averaging 8.5 points per game. So I thought, right, this is a great opportunity to get off De Bruyne. I think he's probably going to miss 2 or 3 games. Jump on to Mahrez, and then of course Pep went on to play him for, I think, 55 minutes, and then dropped Mahrez the next game and brought back De Bruyne. So that mess took me like 3 games to recover from. Meanwhile, De Bruyne was banging in assists all over the place. So, these educated risks don't always pay off is the key. So don't be, forcing differentials the whole time. It's more a case of, everyone's got their own strategy. Mine is to look for the teams and the team defensive stats. So I use the Hub tool quite a lot, looking at the team defensive stats in the last 4 or 5 games, home and away, and then look at the team that's coming forward, and then of course look at the player. So looking at next season, I might be looking for Man City or Liverpool attacker against a team that probably leakier than people think. Arsenal, playing Arsenal this season away would have been a very interesting one for captaincy because they were incredibly licky. So that's the sort of educated risk I would take.
I wonder if there's some kind of algorithm in there, Andy. Kind of home home XG versus away XGA, some kind of algorithm. It's probably quite
Yeah, I mean, well, I
easy
certainly
to.
haven't modeled it, but that's what I would look at. So I look at
Yeah,
XGC
yeah,
and obviously the team's XA and the player's XG and the team's XG. So I think maybe there is something of looking at. I know that the hub tool has the expected points,
yeah.
so maybe you can look at that expected points and then expected points conceded or XGC and look at modeling it some way. But no, I'm quite happy with just eyeballing it because
Yeah,
sometimes the gut feel. I think now we get kind of shrouded by looking at for confirmation bias really in what everyone else is doing, and we find snippets of information and we go, right, well that's just convert. I need to pick that player as my captain. When actually, if you went back to what you used to do, you might be finding that you're more successful. So I think that's something to be learned for next season as well. Is take the educated risks and also play your own game. Is the best way of saying it.
definitely.
Um,
Were there any other key learnings, Andy, that you feel you either took into that season or have taken out of the season? Anything that you do a bit differently, or was there kind of one or two things where you were like, if I hadn't have done that, I wouldn't have won? Are there any others? Or
yeah, I think that, and this is quite controversial because I know a lot of very experienced players, very enthusiastic, kind of advocate this as a strategy. And I know some of the guys who are in the top 10 of all time, kind of, in terms of average rankings. And maybe that's how they get there, but they take quite a lot of hits throughout the season. I don't know what the average is, but certainly last season I only took one hit, I believe. And I'm a big advocate. I'm very hit averse, not taking too many hits because the way I look at it is, and this goes down to the way you plan your team. If you plan your team pretty well over more than 3 game weeks, I'm not just talking about double game weeks. I'm talking about fixtures, European games, and budget. In theory, you shouldn't need that many hits to sort out your team. Now, of course, an injury can happen, or a surprise double game week that wasn't expected can happen, and then you need to be I would advocate taking some hits for that. But really, if you've planned your team, I don't really feel that, especially with a hit costing 4 points, that the break even. If you take a defender, for example, let's say you've got a playing defender and you're thinking of taking a hit to bring in, I don't know, Alonso or Ashley Cole or Robertson or something. For that break even, you're probably going to expect minimum 2 points from the existing player you have. To kind of break even from that, you need to be on a clean sheet.
yeah,
Now, of course, some of those players will get attacking points or bonus. It's just the way that they've been playing. But you've really got to be, just to get to the break even, you've got to be banking on a clean sheet. Now, you could argue at certain points Liverpool were almost guaranteed a clean sheet, but they had some spells of conceding. So I'm just not keen on taking hits for players unless you have an injury, right? Or unless it's a double game week
yeah,
when
of
it's
course, yeah,
obvious. But if you have an injury and you're going to be scoring 0 points, then the break even's a lot lower. But if you've got a player that's going to play and get your minimum 2 points, then I'm not a big fan of taking a hit to bring in a player. Now, it changes the way that the game was played this year, changes slightly in the sense that price rises were happening so quickly that unless you jumped on it, sometimes people felt they were in a situation where they had to take hits to get in a player before you went out their price range. But again, that goes back to the planning and the strategizing. You should be able to kind of think, right, well, this player's just scored, Anthony Martial's just scored two goals, Man United player. He's going to rise at least 0.2 million this game week. I'm gonna have to take a risk and bring him in early. Otherwise, I'm gonna have to take a hit to get him in by removing someone else. So again, I think it's controversial because a lot of experienced players do take a lot of hits and they almost use it as a strategy. Of course, it can work, and it can work very well. If you bring in a player who bangs 2 or 3 goals, but over the course of a season, I would say that a lot of points are wasted taking in hits. Now, with a kind of long-term view. But my point is, if you can kind of create that long-term view over 2 or 3 game weeks through good planning, potentially you don't need to take the hit.
it's very interesting. You kind of mention around how we used to play as well, because now we're kind of in the off season. I'm playing some sim games, right, and I haven't got all the kind of FPL fanfare and and stats and ownership stuff kind of thrown in my face all the time, so to speak. And I've gone back subconsciously. I was thinking about this here this morning. I've subconsciously gone back to how I used to play the game, and I used to play the game in 8 or 10 week blocks of fixtures. And I was thinking about it, and I think over the last few years, because there's such an urgency now around FPL, I think I've started to change my block size to maybe 3 or 4. And I wonder whether, a lot of people are doing this, and whether that's contributed then to having to feel like you have to make hits because, you have to take hits, because I think if you're only planning for 3 or 4 games on the trot, your team will never be in a really, it constantly needs to change, because, you've got those 15 kind of players in your team who you always want to, be optimal. If you're trying to do that over 3 or 4 weeks, I think it's very, very tough. Or if you try and do it over 8 weeks, like I'm playing one of the off-season sim games now, and I'm really, really enjoying it, because my, I'm just making the obvious move, looking at the fixtures, looking kind of 8 fixtures down the line, and what I'm finding is my team is set up very well every week, and I'm banking a transfer all the time. I'm just wondering whether I should look to take that now into next year and try and get back to that. Instead of the short-term view. I think there's an urgency in there around, we need points, we need points, we need points. And I think that kind of leads us down, those 2 green fixtures, yeah, but they've got 3 or 4 red after them, and you're going to have to move them on or wherever it is. So, sorry, it struck a chord then when you mentioned it, and it makes absolute sense.
No, the price rises were vicious this season. If you think the likes of, Pukki, then Lundstrom, and then we had the Vardy, and then Ings. These players were going up 0.2, I think some went up 0.3 in a week. And so the other thing that I did last season, and I actually did it, this season and last season, was take the early wild card, which initially I wasn't too happy with the results, simply because, I think I brought Martial in, and Man United went in that terrible bad run of form. But it's something I'm thinking about potentially writing an article about advocating it, because if you think about the start of the season, there's maybe even next season, 6, 7, 8 million players who are everyone's kind of bought into the game then. Everyone's going to their work leagues and going, right, oh yeah, that player just scored, I've got to bring him in. This is why I think we're seeing so many kind of fast price rises. So if your team doesn't have those 4 or 5 players and you really want them, that are hitting form, cheap in price, and are going to be rising substantially, the early wild card set me up quite well last year, and I think the season before, I can't remember exactly when I played it, because then you kind of get on all the bandwagons. You got all the form players. Obviously, there's things like fixtures to weigh up as well, and you can have almost like an early squad refresh and not have to even consider taking hits, and your plan can kind of be shortened to get to the team that you want. So of course it depends, if you have some of those players that are performing, then, or maybe we don't see a 4 million defender start scoring goals again next season, or a promoted team start scoring like Pukki, so then there's no need for it. So traditionally I'd always said, play your wild card when your team needs it, when you've got too many injuries, when you've got a double game week coming up. But more and more, I'm starting with the early price rises and some of these foreign players coming out of nowhere, I'm starting to think that an early wild card could help you perform well throughout the season.
And with the exponential growth of FPL as well, right? So it's changed. It's gone up from last season to this season, 6.5 million players to 7.5. If we work on the basis there will be exponential growth again, we'll see 8 and 8.5 million, which will only accelerate more transfers, which you would think, unless they tweak the algorithm, and that's also going to lead to more and more rises. So, but yeah, interesting stuff. Just one last one, Andy. It's a bit of an impossible question, but I'll kind of ask you it anyway. Do you think it's impossible to ever repeat the finish?
I don't think it's impossible. I just think you need firstly, it's harder and harder to get into the top 10k or the top 20k, whatever your kind of benchmark target is, because of the number of players. So I used to be top 10k was my kind of target. Now I'd probably say like top 25k. I'd be very happy with. So I don't think it's impossible. I just think you need, as I said, you need a lot of educated decisions to come through, and then you need to have a lot of luck. Let's be honest. I mean, some of there's been some very good players over the years that have been in the top 100, and then they've started to take those gambles and they've dropped back. So, and we've seen people. I think my season history is quite volatile as well. There's some players that aim for kind of top 15k every year, but I think the way I tend to play is I'll take a few gambles or educated risks, should I say, throughout the season, and then that will lead me to a bit more of a volatile history. So no, I wouldn't rule it out, but another top 100 finish would be. Yeah, I think it would be very, very difficult, put it that way, just because you need that combination of good team at the start, good wild card, a lot of good, and then you need some luck along with the skill. So, of course, you can't rule it out. Let's be honest.
No.
I think it's very difficult to say to even finish top 1k ever again.
I agree. Okay, thanks for that, Andy. Brilliant. In the next video, we'll be asking Andy for his fantasy football tips and advice, as well as putting him on the spot in a quickfire A or B round. The link is in the description below.